part of the reason why the podcast is called Hello Print Friend is because that level of you can't sit with us, I don't find that in the print world. It's welcome, we've been waiting for you. And that, I think, is a much healthier way to be a human. And I mean that really, really significantly. We only live once, and how am I going to spend my one wild and precious life? Is it going to be making people feel like my time and my attention and their opinion is only valuable if they're only worthy of it if? Or do I spend my time better by saying, I love this and I want you to love it too? And I think that I can get you there.
Miranda Metcalf is one of the biggest cheerleaders for the print world that I have met so far, and I've been at this a while. It was my pleasure to sit down with her and talk about how she approaches art and how she approaches people who are trying to buy art. She works in a commercial gallery, but she'll be better known to podcast listeners as the host and creator of Hello Print Friend, which is the internet's biggest podcast about printmaking. She also tells a story about Tony Fitzpatrick and two big-time New York artists who took him under their wing and introduced him to his future gallerist. So you'll have to stay tuned to find out who those people are. My name is Anne Schaefer, and you've reached us at Platemark. This is Series 3, Interviews with the Wonderful and Crazy Characters of the Print Ecosystem. I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. It is our goal to demystify the crazy art world by introducing you to and letting you get to know better some of the people who make up this corner of the art world. I've been neglectful lately to make clear my positionality, nor have I actually asked my guests to do so, so this is kind of weird, but I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I'm recording Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Okay, buckle up and here we go. I am so happy to be here with you, Miranda. I feel this really interesting kinship with you as two podcasters among maybe 4 or 5 that talk about printmaking on the interwebs. So great to have you.
I had a great time talking with you on Hello Print Friend, and I feel the same way. I think we talked about it a little bit then. We're podcasting people trying to spread the good word, and we're in that category of people who are the print adjacent people who are not the makers, but just the absolute complete enthusiasts where we can't stop talking about it and spreading the message. I think whether we want to or not, it's just in our blood. Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Why don't you introduce yourself for everybody and tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing out there in Santa Fe?
Absolutely. My name is Miranda Metcalf. I host a podcast about printmaking called Hello Print Friend. At one point it was called Pine Copper Lime, but no one could understand what I was saying. So now it's called Hello Print Friend, and I think sums up more as well the nature of it, which is it really is just having a chat with people who use print media or are involved in the print world, and that kinship that we feel with people who are in this medium and share the love for it. I also have been in the commercial gallery world for about 10 years. I have worked in galleries in Seattle, in Sydney, in Bangkok, and now here in Santa Fe. So I am making my way in the art world as best I can, like we all are. And I feel really fortunate to have a creative practice through printmaking where I get to just talk to people who love prints, and I get to reach out to my heroes and make them talk to me for an hour. I can't think of a better job. Yeah.
When did you first know art was a thing?
Oh, well, my grandmother, my mom's mom, was an artist, and she did a fair amount of printmaking. That's my first memory of it, is knowing that and going to her home. She had a home in Seattle. I grew up in Olympia, which is about an hour south, and their home had a lot of art in it. My grandfather had been in the Coast Guard, so they'd spent a lot of time traveling and then traveling after he retired, and so there was really art from around the world. And I remember that and seeing that and feeling that as a magical, intriguing place. This big old house in West Seattle that overlooked the Sound. And it really left an impression on me as a kid of the way art can connect you to other worlds and other places and other people. You have these objects that are on shelves or on the walls, but when you look at them, you realize that you're being connected to another person or another place. And she even had a poster for a Carol Summers exhibition at Davidson Galleries, which I then went on to work for 6 years. That always felt kind of cool.
It's
Yeah.
nice to have come to it as a method of living with art, because a lot of
Mm.
people, museums are their thing, and they don't necessarily make the connection of the things in my house are also art.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, absolutely. And this idea that art lives in a sterilized building with white walls and you can't touch it. And there's secret knowledge about it that you don't have, that the people who are working upstairs in the museum have, and the people who write the text on the walls have, but it's not necessarily for you. You get to come and visit art, but it belongs to this elite class of people with PhDs is absolutely a thing
Yeah, for sure.
in the art world.
Right.
Absolutely.
And or
Yeah.
money, right? Like the collector type.
Yes. Oh
Right.
yeah. Let's not forget class. That is a huge part of it too. I do feel really fortunate that I grew up in that idea of having it being a part of your everyday life, and then visited museums as well as a kid. Olympia is a very artsy town where they have a procession of the species parade every year where people dress up in homemade costumes and do twirly dancing hippie streamer stuff in the street once a year and that sort of thing. So that art with a capital A, of it's in a frame, it hangs on the wall. And then also more everything is art, kind of hippie Evergreen State College vibes as well. Yeah.
The knowledge of art or the realization of art in your grandmother's house, was that intertwined with printmaking, or did your realization that printmaking was this other world? Because let's face it, it's another world.
It's another world. It's definitely another world. So for me, I knew that my grandmother made prints, but I don't think I really understood what that meant. And really coming to understand that printmaking was its own world happened in graduate school when I had this amazing advisor, Dr. Pia Cuneo, episode 100 of the Hello Print Friend podcast. If anyone is interested in the history of printmaking, that's a great one to listen to for sure. But I came to study with her because I was interested in animals in art, particularly. I've always been maybe more interested in animals than people. Like, for most of my life, I've just always been very animal obsessed and animal focused, and the ways in which humans interact with animals and understand animals, and the way in which we can understand that historically through seeing the way visual representation of them was always really interesting to me. And she was someone who studied that. And so I came to her through animals, but she also happened to be a scholar of prints. And I didn't really know that when I showed up. I had done my undergrad in philosophy, and so I really didn't get a huge art historical basis. I didn't really get that overview. Sometimes I tell people that I'm really, really knowledgeable about 16th century art and then contemporary art. And I can't talk to you about anything else because I did this aesthetics background where we talk about the philosophy of art and the how and the why and the what is art. And that was great foundation actually for graduate level work about art history, but I didn't ever really take the survey classes. So 16th century art, Northern Renaissance art, Albrecht, Hans Boldengren, Peter van der Eyden, Jan van Eyck, those were all her purviews and her expertise and what I really studied in depth. And I realized through the courses I took with her that printmaking is its own world, and it's a world in which you get to enter into, as much as one can, historically speaking, hidden realms. You get to see sex, you get to see politics, you get to see inappropriate humor, you get to see work that was made to a market that existed, but not one that was commissioned. So this is work that comes from a completely different place, artistically speaking. It's not a prince or a duke or a king or a really wealthy merchant saying, I want a really big oil painting, and I want the baby Jesus to be at the feet of my wife, and I want to make sure that there's a ship in it because I made my money trading silk, and I want these colors in it, and my family crest here, and a sunset and a church, and then also our local deacon because I want to get into heaven. And there were amazing paintings made. I could look at some of these paintings for a very long time, and I did, but that's a completely different thing than an artist who is creating with the anticipation of trying to make an image that someone will buy because they connect with the image. The money comes from the fact that they're trying to design something that someone will look at and they will say, yes, I want this in my life, without already knowing what it is. And that distinction was so fascinating to me. I wrote my thesis on the Prince of Peter Bruegel the Elder, and his work, particularly when he was making his living as a Bosch imitator, in some cases a Bosch forger, basically. A couple of them were signed as Bosch. That was so interesting because they're twisted and they're strange and they're complex, and there's all these different things happening in it, and that ability to look into those images and understand that someone 400, 500 years ago was doing the same thing that I was doing, which was picking it up and letting your eyes trace around it and trying to decipher what's going on and what the different things mean, and connecting with the image and being amused or disgusted or intrigued by what you're seeing. That was really powerful for me, emotionally as well as intellectually. This idea that these prints were this view into a very personal experience with another human that happened 500 years ago that I could also then have. I loved that. And that was when it was, this is its own world. This is not something that is anything like the grand oils or the grand altarpieces that live at the Prado. This is a human connecting with a piece of visual culture. And I'm also a human connecting with a piece of visual culture. It's a medium which, of course, for the most part can be additions. So you can create multiples. So I need to create an image that's good enough that not only will it sell to people I don't know, but it will do it many times. And that's still what printmakers are up to for the most part, for a lot of what they're doing. And that is its own wonderful sense of intrigue and image making and dealing with what humans like and why, that I really, really loved about printmaking.
Good answer. But it's so hard. When I was in the museum world, the story that you just told would be hard to convey to a viewer standing in the gallery looking at the Peter van der Heyden print after Bruegel, or
Mm,
that it would work so much better if I were standing there talking to the people who were
yeah,
visiting. Like,
yeah.
how do we share our passion for the subject? Like, the story you just told was fantastic, and the prints that go with your story are surprising to me every time. I'm like, what is happening here? And I find something new. And
Hmm.
this idea of trying to be didactic about the seven deadly sins and the it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
It's can get so bogged down into historical dryness when you're trying to connect people with prints and with historical prints. And because there is a certain context to what's going on. So if you go, and I love that you said the seven deadly sins, because that was the series that I wrote my thesis on, is if you were just to see that and you are John Q. Driveway with not a lot of art historical background, but you're interested and you see it, to even begin to explain how the image came to be, you need to go back to Bruegel. You need to go back to the market. You need to go back to the historical context of that time and the imagery of the different animals and what the animals meant at that point to people and all of those different things before you can kind of get to the really gooey, juicy, sexy stuff. At least that's what I think. And maybe that's not true. Maybe there is another way of doing it. Maybe you can just dive in to some of the things that I was talking about. But I do think that, as we were talking about earlier, people have this idea often that art's not for them. I've seen it many, many times working in commercial galleries. I'm sure you saw it all the time in museum work, of the sense of like, oh, that's not my space. That's not for me. I'm not wealthy. I'm not a scholar. And I think people feel that way about history too. They think that history was really boring. History is something that people who have leather-backed chairs higher places get the luxury of reading about and indulging in and learning from. I think it is not a uniquely American problem, but I think particularly an American problem. I remember when I was working in Seattle in a commercial gallery, we had this trope around the gallery that if someone comes and they ask really good questions about the art, like really informed questions about the art, and they buy multiple pieces and they don't ask for a discount, they're Canadian. They're always Canadian. You just could say like, "So where in Canada are you visiting from?" And they'd be like, "Oh, how did you know? Do I have an accent?" And you're like, "No, you're just acting like a Canadian," which
That's
is,
hilarious.
you know, which is to say someone who grew up in a culture and an educational system that provided you with the tools to interact with art on a personal level. And it's something that I see with people in Europe as well. There's this sense that I am allowed to be in here. And as a matter of fact, this space is for me. The reason this gallery exists is so I can come in and I can look at the work and maybe purchase it. And that's of course true for all Americans, but I see it. I see it as a particular pain point in the States of people starting to resist or glaze over when I try to dive in.
It's a
And
failure of our early education system, right?
yeah,
That they cut out the arts first, and nobody seems to think that it's a part of life and a rich part of life, and they're not given the
mhm.
tools to be able to digest it without some serious interest on their part.
Yeah. Well, and we are the only wealthy country that finances its public schools based on property taxes. We're the only one. So, in terms of the resources that a lot of Americans are getting, if they're not in a wealthy neighborhood, they're not going to have an art program. I grew up in Olympia, Washington. It is the state capital. It's a lot of surgeons and senators. So my high school had a kiln, had printing presses, had a fully functional theater with a black box theater attached to it. It was extremely privileged. And because it is the level of wealth and the level of property value was reflected in what you could do within the public schools. That I think is one of the major pain points in art education. And as you say, the early education is we do this stupid fucking thing that means that if you are poor in the United States, you are not guaranteed an education. You just aren't, because you might have schools that overcrowded and underfunded.
Right. In most cities, the museums are very imposing marble temple facade things on a hill
Mhm.
somewhere. And it's long been my goal to demystify that problem and say,
Yes.
we're all just people with cool jobs, like, you know.
Definitely. And of course, they often keep inconvenient hours. Art galleries do the same thing. Even if you're a parent who wants to take their kids to museums or to free cultural events that happen at museums, you could work Saturdays. Most people in service do work Saturdays. And a lot of museums are closed on Sunday, Monday. A lot of art galleries are closed on Sunday, Monday. So, yeah, there's a lot of barriers that have to do with race, economy, class, and unfortunately it's difficult to feel very powerful in terms of affecting that apart from voting and activism. But I think that creating resources like a podcast, I think it helps. It's moving the needle a tiny bit, but if you can just say, this is free, this is available on demand on your call, you can just click and listen. If you have access to the internet, you can listen to incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent people in the arts talk about what they do. That's something. Hopefully. I don't know. I like to think it is.
No, I think we're on the right path anyway. I mean, let's not even discuss access to the internet, right?
I know, that's what I
Right.
say. Big caveat of access to the
Yeah.
internet, but
Right.
yeah.
I do often feel like I'm shouting into the wind or something. But I think if we all do a little bit, hopefully we'll. I don't know. I mean, I so feel like our visual culture is our shared history, and
Yeah.
and we're idiots to overlook it. And prints are really the way that most of that kind of imagery got around. So, like, hello, we're it.
Mhm. I've tried to explain it sometimes that prints were an original meme.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that it's this image that can be multiplied and then inspire something new that someone can riff off of, which then can be multiplied and shared and were used socially in that same way of check this out. Check this out. Let's look at a piece of visual culture and connect with it without needing necessarily a huge explanation, or we can talk about it as content. And it's still a really, really fascinating part of its history. And this idea that the multiplicity of an image and sharing an image is, as you say, so fundamental to our collective memory and our collective history, and really strikes us differently than text. It's just a completely different way of sharing information and of connecting with information. The way an image can hit you all at once and then you get to decipher it, and it's nonlinear information. And you can guide someone's eye around an image, but it's not linear in the sense that textual information is either. These are all sort of fascinating ways that it's different in the way that people connect with it differently and hide information. You can be so clever with what you show and what you don't show. When I was working in Thailand, there's really, really strict laws about insulting the royal family there, which some people are aware of, some people aren't. Thailand is an amazing country, and it has this long history, though, of having a royal family, and they have laws in place that if you say anything degrading about that royal family, and that could include saying something impolite about the king's dog on your personal Facebook, you can be thrown in prison for years. You can be fined tens of thousands of baht for it. And it's even something that visitors can get in trouble for. The way that the artists there find ways to be critical of the monarchy through visual culture is incredible. It's really incredible because they have to be able to walk this line where people who know will look at an image and they'll know. And any kind of authority will look at the image and they'll see a sunset.
Oh, boy.
And so you would see landscape as politic, landscape is anti-monarchist. Something as simple as hanging a painting facing the wall. And if you are someone who is within the activist movement, that will have a meaning to you. But if you're someone who walks around enforcing these laws, you'll just think it's a conceptual art installation. So the ways in which artists continue to use visual culture in absolutely fascinating ways like that, I am just so in awe of it. It's another part of why it's so interesting to be in the work that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think visually you can get gut punched by looking at a Kate Kolvet's print, or you can laugh out loud at, somebody else's something. It's the range of possibilities is so huge, and it's lasting. I always think about the parallel to music. And for me,
Mm.
music can get goosebumps going up my arm, really tight orchestra doing Sibelius or something. The thing that always fascinates me is that you can get that emotional reaction, even though it's a mathematic layout of notes and measures and bars, and that there's this weird intersection of emotion, art, and precision, and not. I mean, it's just fascinating to me, but the performance doesn't last, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's only been really, really, really recently that you can easily share
Right.
a musical experience through a link. I mean, that's just the tiniest blip in the history of humans and music, right?
Well, right. And my brother, who's a musician, pointed out to me that recordings of music are like editioned prints, right? That's how
Mm-hmm.
you spread it around. I'm like, oh my god! And it wasn't until, as you point out, much more recently that was a possibility.
Yeah.
Technically,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really interesting.
That's so great. All right, I love to ask people: have you come across your retirement gift? That one work that you want to have when you're sitting on your porch watching the sunset?
Yeah. I would love a rhino by Dürer.
Ah.
I would. I came to print through animals. I love images of animals. And I love the history of that image. My elevator pitch for it, for anyone out there who wants to give me a lifetime achievement award, when I've recorded 1,000 episodes of Hello Print Friend, Dürer hadn't seen a rhino in person. It was based off a written description of one. And I think he did a pretty amazing job considering he hadn't seen one, to be fair. But I love how that image had this staying power when more accurate images of rhinos were available on the market, that image stayed. That image was appearing on china. That image was appearing in tapestries. That image was appearing in other prints. And there's something so appealing to me about this idea of the power of a good image overpowering accuracy and truth. I will always be drawn to almost this mystical, magical element of a really good image over something that might be closer to the truth. And I just love that about that Dürer. And that it has this mysticism around it from a time in the world when it felt like things could be unknown, that there could be animals you hadn't heard of yet. And that happens every once in a while. You see like a tiny lizard was discovered in
Right. In the
Madagascar.
Amazon, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But this idea of things and adventures out in the world that could delight you that you really don't know.
Well, it was a way to circle the globe. The discovery of various animals in various places marks them as exotic for you,
Mm-hmm.
but it always the people who live there. It's just like that. There's that rhino again. That's
Definitely.
eating my crops or whatever
Yeah.
they're doing. I think the animals is a good through line to a great outlook on globalism and our shared world, right?
Mm-hmm, for sure. And the problematic elements of that, I mean, the exoticism, the Orientalism, the colonism, all of that is in there for sure. And you can't gloss over it. But I think there's also something about that idea of an unknown delight out there in the world, I think is something that I don't really have a sense of in the internet age. I know it's a false sense for sure, but walk around thinking there are no more worlds to discover because I can just Google anything I want and see pictures from any corner of the world. Yeah.
I know. Can you imagine Durr's brain if he had the internet? Like, poof! But the nice thing about the Rhino is that you can have it. Well, I don't have one. I don't think I could afford one. But if you had one on your wall, that would just take you to that place, that wonder filled
Mm-hmm.
moment of, oh my God, there's, and the amazement at his ability to put that forward as I don't know. I think you're right. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have this probably totally an accurate mental image of him sitting there reading this description that his friend sent him who had seen a rhino and trying to put it together. And what was that process like? Like how many sketches did he do until he came up with something that, again, impressively accurate for someone who's never seen a rhino.
Yeah. No, I think that's
Yeah.
true.
Mm-hmm.
So in your non-podcast world, you are selling contemporary art, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
So you're jumping over a few centuries there. How do you? I mean, I'm sure that your love and interest in Northern Renaissance things comes through, but like, how do you approach contemporary art? It's so all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting because I got trained as a historian who uses special objects that we happen to call art. My training was in being a historian, really. And when I was doing my master's degree, I was looking around at the people who were in my cohort who were studying contemporary art, and I was like, oh, y'all doing something really different from me. It was so funny that they were hanging out in the same department because a very different methodology, very different end goals. Whereas for me, it was what can these objects tell me about the life that these people lived? The contemporary scholars were asking questions about how does this fit into the history of art? How does this relate to theories? Much more theory about art, and how does this, the one I always talk about is Foucault. How can I put this square Foucault peg into this round art hole? You feel like you'd see that a lot. Couldn't have a thesis without a Foucault footnote. So yeah, really, really different, as you say. And I think I did, though, gain the skills to be able to dialogue about art and talk about art and contextualize art and lean into the significant points. And that is what served me when I had to go live in the contemporary art world and really be the first line of attack for trying to get the public to care about art and care about prints. My first job was at Davidson Galleries. It was a printmaking gallery. And so having that skill set of just how do people talk about art and in a really practical way, I think actually served me really well. I think if I had been trained as a contemporary art historian, and no shade to contemporary art historians, I think I would have had to unlearn some of that to learn
Hmm.
how do I talk to the public about this, because I was a 24-year-old idiot, like I would have gone into it from that theoretical standpoint, when instead what I found to be much more effective was to tell the story of the artist. And that is what you're doing more in it through a historical lens, is who was this person and how did that affect what they made? What was going on in their life? What was going on where they lived? And what was going on with their contemporaries? That I found really useful, taking that into the public dialogue. And so I'd done contemporary printmaking at Davidson, and that's when I fell in love with, of course, the community and the amazing people who are in this field. That experience was the impetus for starting the podcast, is I just was like, I need to not stop talking to these people just because I don't have this job anymore. And then when I was in Sydney and Bangkok, and now in my current role in Santa Fe, there were always prints around or prints involved, but they weren't as print focused. And so from there, I had to learn about developing a way of talking with people that's not so much process based. A lot of the work that I did at Davidson was, as you can imagine, about process. What makes this an etching? What makes this an engraving? Why is this a lithograph? Should I care if it's a plate litho or a stone litho? How is this different from an offset lithograph? I mean, all of those questions that people come in genuinely not knowing anything about it, quite commonly through no fault of their own. Those same through lines of who was this person or who is this person, and why are they motivated to make this image? I think that to me is the most interesting question. So for instance, last night I gave a tour to the Women in the Arts New Mexico chapter for this exhibition that we had. So they had me walk around and talk about the different artists. And I find that it helps people connect to the work the most when I start from that place of who was this person and why did they make this? And just those two questions. If you've only got 2 minutes on each of your artists. For instance, like Hung Lu is an artist that we represent in the gallery I work at. She passed away in August, known a lot for her oils and her installations, but was a really accomplished printmaker. She got the SGCI Lifetime Achievement Award in 2014, 2012, somewhere in there, in the early 20 teens. And to be able to say, this is a woman who grew up under the Maoist regimes in China, that had a father who was in a labor camp, who spent time in a labor camp herself, who came from that really restrictive background, was trained at CAFA in Beijing in muralism, and then came to the United States and really identified with that experience of being an immigrant and really understanding what she can do now in the US. I've spent some time pooping on the US earlier in this interview, but for Hung Lu, she would say that her life began in 1984 when she came to the US, because she could paint whatever she wanted for the first time in her life. Then you can look at a portrait that she did that we have hanging in the gallery right now that's about 10 feet by 6 feet. And it's this incredible oil, and it's these three women. She only worked from historical photographs, pretty much exclusively. It's based on this photograph of three women in a labor camp in China. And now people are crying, like, and what I mean by that is that now people are feeling that it has this weight to it, that if you just walked in, you would say, okay, it's a really big painting of three Chinese women in disheveled clothes. Why do I care? So that skill set of what was going on in this person's life, what significant events happened that led them to do this, and how do we understand this piece in the context of that narrative? That's art history, and I didn't have to talk about Foucault once.
Well, Hung Lu has this spot right in between the painting world, which I feel like is other, and the printmaking world. She knows the tradition that we all understand in printmaking and that most printmakers do. Everybody pays attention to upon whose shoulders they stand. And I feel like in
Mm.
painting, they're all just slapping shit on the canvas. Sorry, painters. But I think the narrative thing obviously helps people get inside the picture too. But what I
Mm.
can't stand about so much contemporary work, if you go around, you're like, what the hell are these people doing? And they're all trying to talk about it to make it more, or I guess I should say the way dealers and people like me who used to have jobs like I did want to talk about that stuff. It makes it so opaque for
Hmm.
people. Why are you trying to make it harder
Yeah.
to get in with their international art speak crap? It just drives me batshit.
Yeah. I want to try and come up with a reason that's not because you're trying to prove something to yourself and you're trying to prove the fact that you're special and you're trying to prove the fact that you're smart. I really don't want that to be true. Like, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it feels that way a lot. Because oftentimes the people who I meet who I am the most impressed with and respect the most are sometimes people who are at really, really, really high levels in the art world. I did an internship at the Smithsonian, and I got to have coffee with the chief curator of Dutch art at the National Gallery. And he did not do that. I think sometimes people at the very top, they've arrived. He is a professor of art. There's nowhere to go in his career, And I never felt that from, I mean, this is the exception, but like often when I would meet people who were at that level in their career where they were just at the top, I wouldn't feel that. It was everyone who comes in between and want to climb that ladder. That's where I would see that most prominently is when I would try to understand a piece and they're sitting there and they're talking to me about it. And I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. I have a master's degree. I talk about art for a living and I can't follow you. What chance does anyone who comes in with no background in art or art history but a genuine desire to learn, what chance do they have? That was a big turning point for me when I was in my master's work, where I stopped thinking that I was just stupid. And I've realized that if you can't explain this to me in a way I can understand, that is on you. That is a failing on your end, because communicating about art isn't the most easy thing, but this is your job. You have one job, you know? And that was a real watershed moment for me, is that I went in thinking, oh, I don't have this art history background. I'm this philosopher. I can't understand it. And then about maybe halfway through my second year, I was like, wait a minute. It's you. It's not me. It's you. You're bad at your job, which is to explain this to me.
The insular commercial gallery New York world, it's all they're selling to these billionaires, and the billionaires want to think that they are in some secret club. And I mean, it's such a the market. I don't know. The whole ecosystem is fascinating to me because there's so many elements of it that just don't go together.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really funny that way. When you were talking about that and the ecosystem and the economic side of it, I am terrible at selling art at art fairs. I go to Miami, Dallas. I do not sell art at art fairs. I've sold one work of art, I think, at all the art fairs I've ever been to. Print fairs, I'm great. I'm slinging prints. But like art fairs, Art Week, Miami, I'm terrible at it. And I will get this feedback from the people who come into the booth that's like, wow, you gave me more information about this piece than anyone else here gives about their pieces. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Because like because I'm just this obsessive educator. I'm like, oh, let me tell you about swoon. Let me connect you with swoon. And
You've got a
that's
nonprofit brain,
yeah, I
Miranda. That's the problem.
got it. It's funny. I think I do kind of, because I'm like, surely you just need the information and then you'll love it the way I love it. And people look at me like I'm nuts, because that's not how you sell art at an art fair. Which is why I write the press releases at my job.
What you and I are saying is because we sit ourselves inside the print part of the art
Mm.
world, and because it's a democratic quote unquote medium, and because first time collectors can buy a Rauschenberg for $200 at the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair last month, that we are open to all.
Part of the reason why the podcast is called Hello Print Friend is because that level of you can't sit with us, I don't find that in the print world. It's welcome. We've been waiting for you. And that, I think, is a much healthier way to be a human. And I mean that really, really significantly, is that we only live once. And how am I going to spend my one wild and precious life? Is it going to be making people feel like my time and my attention and their opinion is only valuable if, is only, they're only worthy of it if, or do I spend my time better by saying, I love this and I want you to love it too? And I think that I can get you there.
That was always a problem at the museum. As a staff person, most of us were paid not very much. And, I don't want to say what I was paid, but it was not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you're having to hobnob with these people who've got so much dang money. And then there's the artists who are trying to make it.
Yeah.
Like there's this such a chasm between life experiences there, and that they all meet in this transaction of
Yeah.
purchasing. It's
It's
strange.
so weird.
That
Yeah.
that chasm is wide and deep. But that's why the print ecosystem is so wonderful.
Yes.
The ecosystem, first of all, I thought Pine Copper Lime was a brilliant title.
Thank you.
And I'm really sorry that it didn't make the cut after all, but what can you do? Your tagline is, I think I caught it right, artists who use prints and printmaking to do something unexpected.
Mm.
So you do focus on talking to artists primarily on the podcast, right?
Primarily,
With
yeah.
some exceptions, like you've hit a couple of art historians,
Yeah.
and it looks like you've gotten into some print shops lately.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've spoken with Jack Lemmon from Landfall Press. He was definitely a get for me. He was high up on my list and famously difficult to reach. It's like getting to the Queen. You need to find your way there through connections, and I had to move to the town that he lives in. But that was really fun. Catherine at Flatbed,
Mhm.
and I think in some ways the people who have run these long-standing presses, they're the keepers of the institutional knowledge in our world, because they have been in the scene for decades and in this way that I think is really fascinating. They have their own stories to tell, of course, and those are amazing and interesting, but I've also found the fact that they have this through line back into the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, and what printmaking was and what the print market was during that time is also really valuable information. I think about the podcast to a certain extent as an archive, a snapshot of printmaking in this time and this place. Yeah.
I'm really worried about the print publishing sector because I
Mm.
feel like so many of the big shops that are pillars of the system don't have much of a succession plan, and everybody's getting a bit older.
Mm. I think they do have a succession plan from everyone I've talked to. I think they're just playing it pretty close to their chest. Someone that I've spoken to that has off record said, I'm thinking about this person, or I'm pretty sure this person is going to take the reins, or I just need to place these couple pieces from the archive that are really high value, and then I'm going to have enough money to sustain this shop through passing it on to this person. But I agree with you in the sense that we definitely are at a tipping point where a lot of the major, particularly the private printing houses, so not the Tandems and the Tamarins that have the institutional backing of a university, but the private publishing houses, we are entering a generational shift where people are getting older. I think we're really lucky in the fact that when people love printmaking, they love it so much. And there are people who have been working at those studios for some cases decades who are willing to take the baton up. So I hear you in that we are definitely transitioning from a lot of the pillars, as you say, but they don't want to see what they made fall apart. So they are thinking about it. And I think they're playing it maybe a bit close to their chest, because if they just were to say, I need someone to take over my press, they would be flooded, you know? Because I know so many young people who have a dream to run a publishing house, and it's so easy now to put that kind of word out through channels. So fear not. And I think we're going to be okay.
I get nervous. I was talking to Phil Sanders about it, and he has this whole theory about the ecosystem and its survival. And one of the aspects that he talks about, which you've probably heard from him, has to do with some of the big five galleries starting up publishing arms like Hauser and
Mm,
Wirth and Zorner, and that their participation will start supporting some of the shops that are contract printers that may have been seeing fewer and fewer projects coming their way, that infusion will buoy up the system, hopefully, in his
that's
brain.
that would be great. Any kind of buoying, I'm here for sure. I feel like I know that I've been in the print world for about 10 years. And that entire time, I've heard people say, "Oh, I think print's on its way out. I'm worried that people don't understand it anymore." And talking to people who do have some of this really long sight knowledge, like these print publishers, I understand that there was a particular set of circumstances in the 60s and 70s that really led to quite a boom and quite a collecting frenzy around that. And I understand that we're not there anymore. But I think that once people come to understand what printmaking is, they really love it. And I think that the internet is going to save it. I really do, because you can learn about it easily. You can purchase prints easily. Prints are the perfect medium to purchase online. They photograph well, they ship cheaply. You couldn't ask for a better online way to buy art than to buy prints. And if you're looking at blue chip artists, they're relatively easy to authenticate in the sense you can say, did this Jasper John print exist? Oh, it did. Print forging, just, I'm just going to say it. It just doesn't happen. I mean, it does happen, but the level that people are concerned about it is kind of insane. You know, generally speaking, particularly, of course, if you're buying from a reputable gallery in a reputable place and not on a cruise ship, you're getting what it says you're getting. So it's easier to authenticate, lower price point. So it's perfect thing for buying online. And then also, for education, print is something I feel like needs to be seen in real time, and the proliferation of videos as an educational tool that we're seeing all over the internet in the last 10 years, I think it's doing amazing wonders for print. Who couldn't look at someone pulling a print like Big Ink does and not get excited about that? It's and you can see a large scale woodcut in a gallery and think it's a cool image, but then you can just pull up on your phone an image of it being produced. It's going to completely change the way people feel about it. And so there's a lot of ways in which the internet interfaces with the print ecosystem that I think is really extremely positive. Yeah. So I have faith it's going to be okay.
There's still a role for you and me as evangelists.
Oh yeah. Mhm. I mean, even if there's not a role, I'm going to keep doing it, to be honest.
What is an insult you've received that you're super proud of?
Ooh, that is such a good question. I'll have to think about that. A couple of things come to mind. One is that, as I talked about people at art fairs being like, so you talked a lot about this work of art to me. You know, that kind of like, you really told me some things about this work of art. And not necessarily always in a good way, but I'm like, yes, I did. I made you learn. But the other one I'm thinking of is when I was at Davidson, and I was younger, obviously. So I was a woman in her mid to late 20s, and I often had lavender hair. Um,
Oh, I remember you.
yeah. And I would be talking to people about the work. I would get these, which they meant to be comments, but were sort of insults of like, you really know a lot about this. Or I'd be talking to them for a while. And my colleague Shayla Allery, this would happen to her too. She ran the antique and modern department. We were about the same age. People would come in and they would just be a moment where they would pause and look at me and say, "What's your job here?" And
Oh.
you'd be like, "I'm the director." And they'd go, "Oh, good for you. Oh, good for you." Yeah.
What?
And I think that they had assumed that I was whatever
Assistant sales associate?
assistant. Yes, thank you. I was trying to think of like a title. Yeah, the assistant sales associate or was referred to as Sam Davidson's secretary to my face once because I was behind a desk, I'm sure, and a woman. Even though those weren't meant to be insults, I do take pride in that hopefully that again moves the needle a little bit for who they imagine has positions of power in the art world. And it's not all 60 plus white dudes. It's a lot of 60 plus white dudes. But
Well,
there
and Sam is so lovely. If you had talked to him at a fair anywhere, and I used to chat him up, and he and Elizabeth, his wife, who
mm.
I adore, when you walk into the gallery, you're like, "Where's Sam?"
I know.
You know?
You would get that a lot. And it's funny because he was a busy owner of a business, and he was upstairs authenticating Goyas in his library, and he didn't want to come down and there's a reason why he hired us is because he had stuff to do. And so we would get that where's Sam, and
Where's Sam?
who are these people who are talking to us. I would say something around there is sort of that insult that I'm kind of proud of, yeah, involves in that world of just being like, oh wow, a director. It's like watching a dog walk on its hind legs. I mean, you get that kind of yeah. And Shayla always had the best response, which was just, oh, you seem surprised. Like she would just
Oh,
call it out. Shayla had no fear. I just wanted to usually close the sale at that point.
yeah, that's great. Have you ever gotten a piece of advice from somebody that you have held closely for your whole career?
Mm, probably.
I'm like, don't go to the arts.
Oh, yeah.
Or conversely, what advice would you give your 20-year-old
Oh, yeah.
self?
Um, I definitely wouldn't say don't do it, although I have definitely gotten that advice before from people who are in their mid 60s staring down no retirement fund kind of situation. I think that the advice that I've received and the advice I think I would give myself and I would give others would be, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I think that we're told to fear careers in the arts and studying art, and that, oh, you're going to learn how to say you want fries with that kind of mentality. But you're going to be fine. And even if you don't end up in the arts, you're going to be fine. You need to not have this vision of, I will be happy when. I will be happy when I have a solo museum show. I will be happy when I'm the director of a major gallery. I will be happy when I land a tenure track position. Any searching for happiness outside of yourself is going to make you fall short. So you're not choosing the easiest path, but you're not choosing an easy path for a reason. And that's because this is the path you want to be on and you want that challenge. Just know that you're going to be okay, and that the way people end up not okay is by holding on white knuckled to a vision of a very specific future in which they will feel okay. And you're okay now, and you're going to be okay. And enjoy the work that you're doing. And if you don't enjoy it, just go do something else.
Your answer is a really great indicator of how differently we think. You're a big picture thinker, and I'm an in the weeds thinker. So
Mm.
my best piece of advice is to get over your stage fright and nail down your public speaking as fast as you can, because you'll talk for a living in the arts.
Yes. Yeah. I had this, as I mentioned earlier, I had this event with this group of women, and it was in the evening, and I had a therapy appointment in between work and the event in the evening. And I was crying like you do in therapy. That's what it's there for. It's there to heal you. No shame, mental health awareness. Sometimes you need to sit under a weighted blanket and cry. And I was leaving, and my lovely therapist was like, "Oh, you're going back to work. Are you going to be okay?" And I was like, "Girl, I could give an artist talk with both hands tied behind my back and blindfolded, listening to heavy metal music really loud." That kind of speaks to what you're saying about getting that down and getting that so ingrained in you that you can go from your therapy session to your 45-minute lecture and just no fear. I'm just like, I have done this. I have done this hungover in Russia in front of the UN. I can do this now. So yeah, that is really good advice. But yeah, a philosopher in my heart, and so I'm always interested in the big picture, the internal, the existential struggles and trying to find the solution to that, because that's what takes up a lot of my day. And that's why sometimes I have to sit under a weighted blanket and cry. Yeah.
How are you different from yourself pre-pandemic? Like, has the
Mm.
pandemic been a catharsis, or
Oh my gosh. How honest should I be? That's
honest as you'd like?
if I'm being totally honest, the pandemic was a cue for me that I needed to get sober. And I did.
Oh, wow.
And that's a huge life change.
Wow, sure is.
I think a lot of people, many, many people, when you have a relationship with substances that change you, and then you're put in a situation where reality is really, really hard, and you lean into that practice, sometimes that's not good. I think I'm really different in the sense that when you live clear headed for what's, now been a little over 18 months, you don't have any capacity to run from the things that you were running from. And that facing them and crying under a weighted blanket sometimes, that changes you. Like, I think I'm really different because of that. And that was not necessarily specifically the pandemic, in the sense that of what the specifics of what was going on in the world, but just kind of understanding the unhealthy coping mechanisms that I had always had that were brought to a fever pitch when put under a lot of pressure that you have to face, and then face everything that you had been using your unhealthy coping mechanisms to cope with. The end result of that is that I've had to understand that I'm someone who deals with a lot of anxiety that I could cover up, understand that I'm someone who has patterns of behavior around people pleasing that are extremely intense to the path of being mildly pathological, and understanding in my late 30s what I'm going to do about all that. And, I made a joke in passing about having to give a talk in the UN hungover in Russia, but I should never have been hungover for that talk. And looking back at those times in your life and saying, okay, what was going on that I felt like I needed to do that? That's it, a profoundly life-changing experience to understand patterns of behavior that have become so ingrained in you that you don't think twice about them, and you surround yourself with people who share those patterns of behavior. So it all seems normal. So I'm a lot healthier and a lot happier living the way I'm living now, which is to relearn what I'm going to do about the problem of being human and find ways to deal with that problem that actually make it better and not worse. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, when you asked that question, I was like, I could say, oh, I appreciate my family more, which I do, but, I think also, to be totally honest, that's the big change that came from COVID for me. I think I'm really different on the other side of it in ways that probably people who know my kind of public persona wouldn't notice, right? Because
Right.
you're always your best self when the spotlight's on you, you know? You hear kinds of things like being kind of a niche internet celebrity. It's what I am. My husband, Tim, would hear all these sorts of things about like, oh gosh, you're so lucky to be married to Miranda. It must be amazing to be married to Miranda. And it probably fucking wasn't a lot of the time, because
Right.
I wasn't who I was on stage, for lack of a better word, because that's my best self. And I'm learning how to be more of that self all the time through learning how to be a healthier person. Yeah.
That whole on stage thing is really tough, though, in a marriage. My husband has been heard to say over the years, we've been married for almost 28 years.
Mm-hmm.
He'll say, I love watching you when you're on like that, but how come I don't
Yeah.
get any of that?
Yes. Hard same. Hard same. Where it's like you're out there and you're hustling and you're a public persona and you leave it all on the mat out there. And then I need to come home and not give attention to anyone because I
Right.
need to recharge. And they're like, but I like your attention. That's why I married you. And
I know.
you're like, too bad, baby. I'm winning the bread, like, like, and yeah. And learning how to prioritize. And for me, realizing how much of that prioritization was based in fear and this sense of I have to be perfect all the time professionally because that's the only way I'll be safe. That's the only way I'll get the promotion. That's the only way I'll get to the point where I can ever make a living wage in the arts. And so I am in fight or flight and I'm leaving it all on the mat. And when I get home, there's nothing left for you. Does not a happy marriage make? So learning about, okay, how do I actually temper my energies so I can prioritize what truly is the most important thing to me, which is my husband, my family. And that's a learning curve as well, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
No
And,
doubt about it.
yeah. And being hungover a lot less means I have a lot more energy to go around, which
Oh, for
is
sure. Right.
helpful. Yeah.
The thing that I find to be the downfall of our position in the sector that we are in is that when I've been listening to podcasts about how to grow your podcast
Mm-hmm.
and monetizing and all that, part of some people's plan is for you to start getting paid as a a conference keynote speaker or something. And I'm
Mm.
like, our sector, you and me, Miranda, our sector is full of people who can give that 45-minute lecture hungover in front of the UN in Russia at the drop of a hat. Like,
Yeah.
nobody will pay us to come and talk.
Yeah, right. I'm sure there's, as you say, podcasts that cover those sectors that don't have that proliferation of people who can do that. I'm thinking, I'm sure tech, for example, the amount of people who have the skill set to speak comfortably and effectively and entertainingly is probably smaller. And, no shade to tech. I couldn't code if you were paying me $1
I
million.
know.
It's a different skill set. And I think, we
Sure.
sort of naturally go where our skill sets are. I was just listening to Tony Fitzpatrick, and he was telling his story about being discovered. Basically, he was selling work on the street in Washington Square in New York, and two super cool looking guys came up to him and said, there's an easier way to do this, right? And he's like, what do you mean? And they walked him up the street to the gallery. He said there's a gallery 5 blocks away, but it took 20 minutes because they had to stop every few feet and get hugs and kisses from people. And he's like, who are these guys? These guys are obviously really cool. They walked in, they introduced him to the gallerist. Tony had been in there trying to show the work a couple days before, and they said, we only look at slides on Tuesdays, that kind of thing. And he said, you should look at this guy's work. And it was Keith Haring and Basquiat. And he got a solo show at that place because, of course, when Keith Haring and Basquiat walks in an artist to your gallery, you sit up and listen. And it's an incredible story. He talks about this idea of luck is preparation and timing coming together. He had to have been making work, obviously, that was good enough that 2 of the 20th century art geniuses stopped on the street to look at and thought was good enough to introduce to a gallerist. But also, you can't discount the absolute luck of that. Happened to be walking by, happened to be paying attention, happened to have time to walk him into the gallery. We are in a field in which so much based on luck. It's so much based on someone, a gatekeeper, seeing your work at the right place at the right time with the right opportunity for you. And I think that can either be a comfort or can drive you mad. And you need to just make a decision. Because you get to decide. You can make a decision to say, my life is not only okay if Keith Haring discovers me on the sidewalk. My life is okay if I know that I made the best decisions I could for myself whenever I could. Maybe that means that my work is never on a gallery wall, but it needs to be okay that you made the work. And I need to make podcasts even if nobody listened to them, because these are the things that I just want them to exist in the world.
Right.
I want the conversations with these people to exist in an archive. I want to talk to people who are saying interesting, true, and insightful things about printmaking and the art world, even if I never get a sponsorship from what's the bed. I never get a sponsorship from Casper mattresses, which is like what I feel like is always sponsoring the other podcasts. Yeah.
This is my last question. You'll be
Mm.
happy to know because I know you have to get to work. Who is in your top 3 gets that you want for the podcast? Wouldn't it be cool if we could interview Peter van der Heyden or something?
I know. I know. Or Elizabeth Catlett. Like, I think about that all the time. I'm just like, "Ugh, I just missed you by just like a decade, you know?
I feel like that
Mhm.
about Hader.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. I bet. For I get definitely Suko. Shepherd Ferry. I cornered him at Miami Art Week and he was really nice. He was trying to get out of the booth and his wonderful wife took my email and I've emailed them a bunch of times and they haven't returned my phone call. So yeah, Shu Bing, Shuko, Shepherd Ferry. I'd love to talk to Marwin Begay. I've talked to him a few times via email, but we haven't gotten a time yet. So yeah, but I'd say like that group is definitely, yeah, right there at the top. Carlos Hernandez and Bill Fick were in Santa Fe, so we're definitely going to have them both on at some time. So that's one to look forward to. Tony Fitzpatrick, who I mentioned, supposed to talk to this weekend, who I'm really excited for. Yeah, there's just so many great printmakers in the world that I really feel lucky. I never feel like I'm getting to the bottom of the well of people to have cool conversations with. Yeah.
It's a deep well for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah.
I hope I didn't just go off too deeply on my
You were very philosophical. I was very appreciative of
I
it.
really appreciate the invite and getting a chance to talk with you again.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks again. It's always
Of
good to
course.
see you. I feel like we've gotten to like hang out twice now. This is really fun.
I know. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today for Platemark and my interview with Miranda Metcalf of the podcast Hello Print Friend, formerly known as Pine Copper Lime. I really enjoyed our conversation and I'm so glad she was able to do it. Her podcast, Hello Print Friend, is available to you anywhere you get your podcasts, and its main homepage is helloprintfriend.com. Surprise, surprise. So check out her good work there. She's doing a tremendous job. And also thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. We're going to keep going with interviews with the wonderful and interesting people of the print ecosystem as we go along. So I'm glad you're coming along for the ride. We will see you next time.